Hi, and welcome to an episode of the JetRails podcast. I'm Robert Rand, your host. I'm joined by Brandon Alberts with NuEthic. We're going to be talking with you today about keeping up with Magento 2 end-of-life challenges that Magento 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, all with their own end-of-life dates that have crept up on a lot of merchants. And so we're going to be helping to share some meaningful information about the history of some of these versions of Magento and best practice around upkeeping your Magento 2 site and what that life cycle looks like. Brandon, would you do the honors of introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that, Robert. Yeah, my name is Brandon Alberts with NuEthic Development. NuEthic's been around since 2009. We've been developing Magento websites since then. Gone through a lot of different iterations with Magento 1.9 and the many different versions that they've gone through. We worked on enterprise versions, cloud versions, everything you can name that Magento's changed over the time. We love community. We do a lot with community and feel like it's a very good platform with open source. I've been in the business. I purchased NuEthic back in 2017 from a gentleman that worked for a bunch of different agencies, and he built a business called NuEthic because there was a lot of, in 2008 and 9 and 10, everybody wanted to have their own custom CMS platforms, and they were proprietary and they were the new thing, but hey, we're such and such business and we've got our own CMS and it's great. You can get locked in with us. He had several customers that wanted to leave the business that he was working for, and they wanted to go to like WordPress or something else. And the company said, well, good luck. You're going to need to buy a new domain and a new website and build it out with whatever other platform you want. We'll hold that. We've got you basically held hostage. And so he didn't feel that was very ethical. And when he founded NuEthic, that was the reason he founded NuEthic, was the whole brand that, look, we're going to go with open source. We're going to let you set up Magento open source, or we'll set it up and give you the keys so you can let us in and we can make any improvements or changes. And you have full rights and access to your platform. And if you want to cut us off, you can. All you have to do is change your password and we're no longer available to touch anything. So that's where NuEthic got started. And the purpose behind it and the values of NuEthic is to help people have full access and transparency with their website. And I bought it because I own a credit card processing business. I've been in that. And the business that I owned was called Value Pay. And it has similar values. And the reason I call it Value Pay is because I have similar standards and ethics that NuEthic have. And it was just a really good fit to fit these two businesses together and be able to help Magento clients take credit card processing as well as build a website. So we've gone that route to help with both sides of things, and that's where we are with NuEthic.
I'm still bewildered that we're heading into 2020, and I still run into businesses that find out the hard way that they don't own their website, that it's being held hostage in some way or other. They can't get access to the files. They don't have access to their hosting environment. They don't own the theme. They don't own some customization or part of their site. That it's understandable if you're selling on Amazon that sometimes at first you don't realize they're not really your customers. They're Amazon's customers. Those things happen at first to merchants, but when you sign contracts, people tell you they're going to build you your website, but the fine print really is different. It's still happening today. I love the fact that you've got two companies and value and ethics. It's huge that I can't think of two things more important to an e-commerce merchant today. So with that, why don't we dive in a little bit? I know Magento 2 first debuted back in 2015. So we're coming, I guess we probably are just hitting 4 years now of Magento 2. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, do you remember, before I throw my thoughts on it to the crowd, what were your thoughts around the release of Magento 2? Was it an exciting time for you? Was it a little bit of chaos?
So taking over this business, I got a lot of the backstory, and I know that back in 2016 or so, Magento, I followed a little before I got into this industry. Obviously, I was working with websites before that, so knew a little bit about Magento. But I know that a lot of people were frustrated because it wasn't very stable and buggy, and it should be being a brand new release, and came out with all open source. So it was very problematic. And then the whole Magento 2 version started with, I guess, Magento, then eBay, then a private equity firm. So it's gone through different owners throughout the staging of its life. And I think when it got released, it's just been through a lot of hands and different versions.
I would say there was a lot of pressure on Magento to get it released. And so what often happens, you have this major project that got released when it was probably, you could say it was in beta. I'll go with alpha. It was early. It was very buggy. And, it had a lot of positive virtues if you had the money to deal with those bugs, perhaps, and the patience, if you had the development resource available. Your average merchant certainly didn't. So I think a lot of those early adopters were frustrated by the experience. But as with anything of the kind, Magento 1 took a long time to reach, what I would call true stability, where people were happy with it, the way that they are with Magento 1.9. And you've still got lots of folks that want to be on 1.9. But I think the other confusion on market, which I don't know, I'll ask you, do you still run into merchants that don't understand that going from Magento 1 to Magento 2 is a replatform? Do they still have some misunderstandings about what it's going to take to get a theme and extensions and data moved over and content in the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, occasionally we do. A lot of people, I think, Magento 2 has been around for quite a while now. When it first came out, I think people were upset because they thought that it was just going to be an update and not a platform migration, right? Magento 2 and Magento 1.9 are not the same platform. And it is a whole new website, a new database, everything. So they have to do a migration. And a lot of people were frustrated with the thought process of migrating versus just doing an update. And then with any software, iOS or Microsoft, you do an update, you click on update now, it just automatically updates and you're done, right? It restarts your computer and you're ready to go. And so I think people were expecting Magento 2 to be similar in that process. And it's taken a lot of time and education to educate people to know that that's not how it works. It's a complete re-platform of the website, whether you like it or not. That's how it goes. And I think we do find people still having issues with that. Last year alone, we had a client that they had a development company out of the country building a Magento 1.9 website. And before it even hit the market, it was breached. And they came to us and they're like, we're just having real problems and we need some help. Can you give us some guidance? There's a little bit of communication issues with who we're working with now. Can you help us out? So we look at their site and we're like, yeah, you're breached already. Your credit card processing is hacked and you haven't even gone live. And he's like, oh yeah, I kind of figured it might have been our website because I have a credit card that I used on our site for a test. And it all of a sudden got spent all over the world. And that was the only place I used it was our site as a demo cell. So he was pretty upset to find out that they were building on Magento 1.9 and that he'd studied and read about Magento 2. He thought it was just going to be an update. And behold, he found out that it was a full migration build. And we ended up rebuilding it on Magento 2 and not doing a migration because it wasn't worth the effort of dealing with the breach. And he hadn't gone public yet with his site, so there wasn't any data on there to really move. So we got him set up on a new Magento 2 instance, and he was happy with that. But very frustrated to find out it was not an easy process of migrating.
I find that you've got these merchants. By this point, they've been hearing. If you're on Magento 1 and you haven't been pitched on going to Magento 2 yet, I don't know where you've been hiding, but I think I want a vacation there.
Yeah, for sure.
It's definitely been overwhelming. The amount of messaging around the end of life of Magento 1 and the opportunities to upgrade to Magento 2 or something else. I think that professionals working with other platforms have all been trying to vie for the space that it's like, the ball's in the air. And so it's a great time to try to, treat it like a tip off, at the beginning of a round there and say, switch to another platform. We're finding that a lot of folks that built on Magento 1 that were successful with their businesses, that there's a reason why they built on Magento and that they're likely to continue forward. On the other hand, we certainly see some folks that were SMB, very low online revenue, that it might make sense to make a shift somewhere else. That especially with Magento 2, I would say from where I sit that the maintenance cost is higher than Magento 1. The development cost is higher. It's a more complex platform. It's more robust, which is hard for a lot of Magento users to imagine, just because Magento 1 is such a strong platform. But in essence, I'd say in the early days, and when Magento 2 first launched, it was very expensive because you were paying for a lot of bug fixes and you were paying for the learning curve of being, on a new platform, and not having as many extensions to choose from, having to build customizations and so on and so forth. But even today, I would still see Magento 2 as perhaps a little bit more of a cost center than Magento 1. Would you?
I would totally agree with that. In fact, we've seen it's been anybody that wants to migrate from Magento 1 to 2, the cost is more expensive than it was originally to build it on Magento 1. And the fact is they have to do a full migration of database. We have to refactor a bunch of code. And so the cost is quite a bit more than just building it brand new, fresh. And that's been a problem for a lot of customers when we give them quotes. They're like, wow, I did not expect that kind of pricing. And it gives them a little bit of heartburn, and they actually start to look around. And a lot of them come back because they find out that they can't do as much customization on, say, a BigCommerce or a Shopify, to where Magento gives them that built-in functionality to change the admin panel or add additional admin panels and create custom functionality that you just don't get elsewhere.
Yeah, I know that we've been partnering up with BigCommerce around their new offerings in headless commerce, trying to offer something that's more open. But there's an absolute difference between, on the spectrum, Shopify, a headless BigCommerce site, a Magento site. They're not apples to apples. I mean, it's always great when you can get a professional in there that can tell you some of the differences and help you figure out what's going to be best for your individual business. There are use cases, I think, for every platform that, I personally have a lot of respect for these companies, but we're not talking apples and apples.
For sure.
That's the hard part.
We had a client that they wanted us to build a BigCommerce site. And they came to us and said it's a pretty simple out of the box. And they started talking about a custom ERP integration solution, being able to manage kind of in a parent-child relationship, having additional employees buy underneath their manager, and all this complex architecture that just isn't built into BigCommerce. And so we gave them a couple of options to build it into BigCommerce, but there's an app that would do all that functionality outside. And we said, that you guys came to us with a basic idea, and you've turned into now a very complex website. And we ended up giving them a bid with Magento and showing them, look, the cost to actually build in the Magento is cheaper than it is to build it in BigCommerce, because we have to do it as a third-party app. And they ended up deciding to go with Magento. A lot of people it's a tough decision, finding out that you have all these custom features in Magento 1.9, and they're still not out of the box solutions for, say, a Shopify or a BigCommerce.
Yeah.
And so they need to rebuild it in something like a Magento. And we're experts at doing that, but sometimes finding something that's simpler for that solution for maintenance costs, it's a no-brainer to go to another platform and maybe have a little less features and functionality for the cost of the small business.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to spend $20,000 a year on Magento maintenance if you're only bringing in a couple $100,000 a year on the website.
Agreed. I would, tell folks the same. But there's that breaking point that when you're using too many Shopify apps, and not only the ongoing costs of those, but the conflicts between them, your reliance on all of these third-party systems that are hosted elsewhere that you don't control, it starts to really add up in weight and maintenance and and complexity of the site. And all of a sudden, instead of getting what you needed out of a core platform and extending that platform, sometimes you wind up on a runaway train of all these third-party systems that don't always work to your advantage.
That's
people
why
don't
it's
realize
really hard to find out what the real return on investment is, because, like I said, this one client came to us thinking they had a pretty simple out-of-the-box solution. Yeah. But when it came down to their parent-child functionality and architecture, that's not really out of the box on any platform. Even Magento, it's not built in there. It is built in there, but they wanted to have an approval process that their employees could buy products, but it stops in a queue and gets approved by their manager. And once their manager approves it, then that goes back into the order queue and gets shipped out and goes into a PO and paid for.
And what's interesting is that that's one particular use case. Obviously, everyone has their own, but at that point, not only do you have to build that if you're going SaaS and write it as an app, but that's got to be maintained. It's got to be hosted somewhere, which should be mission critical. It's got to be secure and not slow down the site and be scalable to handle whatever traffic is going through your site and whatever is going on. Let's say it's something that's customer facing that's going to be impacting the load. You've got all these different things going on as these use cases come up. And sometimes, at JetRails, we can host those items, but people are surprised at what it takes to really go the custom route with these SaaS solutions that, yes, they've got APIs. Sometimes they're flexible, sometimes they're not, depending on the feature sets that you need to work with. Some platforms are more flexible than others, but there's a difference between going open source with something more robust in the first place. And, so I'm going to circle us back around Magento 2 and, say that, Magento 2.0 was pretty rough, but that hit its end of life in 2018. Magento stopped pushing out updates for it. 2.1, I'd say, is probably the first time we got to stability in Magento. That came out in 2016, went end of life earlier this year in 2019 in the summer. 2.2 is heading in the same direction, that basically every year Magento's put out another version of Magento 2. And, we've been seeing those hit end of life, that basically Magento's not going to keep maintaining every single version. They're going to push you toward the more modern stack, more, the security updates and feature updates and other things, so that you keep up with the times. How have you seen that upgrade process working out for merchants? I know that it's not a one-click upgrade, obviously, to get between the minor and major versions of Magento 2.
Yeah, and I think that's been frustrating on everybody's part. It's been good for us as a development team, where we get paid to do development, but that's not always the most important feature for a customer, right? It's not, hey, let's take your money to keep you updated. It's been pretty frustrating, I think, for all of us on the development side of it, as well as clients, with Magento 2.1 to 2.2.9. That's all an update process. So every time you need to do an update or an upgrade, it's a full version update, and it's very time consuming and causes a lot of development time to be put into it. So I think we're finally seeing a turn with Magento with 2.3 to where they came out and made it with Magento patch support. That patch support, I think, is a huge benefit to the community, to every person that has Magento 2.3, that now they're able to actually take a small patch, throw a Band-Aid on where they may be bleeding, and move on. And for somebody that's spending money on development, that makes sense, because you don't want to constantly be doing these giant updates to grab a few more features when you have to do a ton of development time.
Well,
it's very cost prohibitive.
You have to hope that you can upgrade your extensions, that they're going to be compatible with the new version, and you're going to have to deal with that. There's going to be some testing to happen when you go through a more major upgrade, for sure. You're also, more than just the extensions, but let's say when you go to Magento 2.3, some of the newer features with progressive web apps and GraphQL and going, in essence, more headless, to benefit from it, you're going to build a new front end. That may not be something that a merchant's inclined to invest into overnight. It's going to give them a faster front end. It's going to do some great things for them. Maybe some really strong, depending on what they build with it, of course, some really strong, user interface. But at the same time, you can't always budget for that. Things like that have to be planned and scheduled sometimes, and you can't be doing things like that every year. So I think that builds some of the challenge in. So today, if you are building someone on Magento 2, I guess knowing that 2.2 goes end of life this December, next month, so this year, is it safe to say that you're building them on the latest stable version of 2.3? And
absolutely.
That's where you go.
We don't ever do any, when we do development, we're always working on the latest versions. And like I said, for us, 2.3, I feel like, is a turning point in Magento. I feel like it's a huge turning point in the fact that maintenance is going to go down. I think that customers over the past 3 to 4 years with Magento 2.0 have felt very frustrated with the upgrade process and the way the infrastructure was set up. It just wasn't easy for updates. And now with 2.3 going forward, we have that patch and version control that I think is a little easier for people to palette. So we always do any of the latest builds. Anytime we start a new build, we're starting out on the latest version possible. But absolutely, the 2.3 version is, I think, a game changer for us and our clients on new builds, because it's going to cost them less in the long run to maintain. I feel like Magento 1.9 got to a real good stable part when we were doing just patch updates and upgrades, and it was very simple. It would take us 4 hours to do a patch.
Yeah, just put in the security patch, test it, push it out to live. A lot simpler than going through a full upgrade. I'm with you there. And look, maybe it helps people skip a few iterative versions until they can warrant a bigger update. I know sometimes those leaps can be difficult onto themselves, but I think that's part of the challenge, is that being on Magento 2, you've really been pushed to stay up to date, to stay cutting edge, and you haven't really been able to get to that happy place. So I'm glad to see the patches as well, and hopefully those continue to meet the need. I know for people on Magento 2.3.2, they recently put out a patch with promises to continue on in that direction. Now, Magento 2.3 is supposed to continue to get updates until somewhere in mid-2021. But I know that they've been talking about releasing Magento 2.4 somewhere around Q1 of 2020. That we're probably a few months away at most. And probably they'll probably have it be, I would imagine, for Magento Imagine, which is going to happen at the end of March of 2020. So I think that's a pretty safe bet that they'll want to announce by then Magento 2.4. At that point, people are going to have to decide. But I think you're right that if they're going to put out security updates for Magento 2.3, people may just stay with that for a while and stay in a safe place.
Yeah, Magento 2.3 just came out too, so it's got a little while before there's any, I think, major changes. They've added some Elasticsearch and some other simple WYSIWYG updates and things that's made Magento 2.3, I think, a little better than the previous version. So we are continuing to see good progress with Magento, and I don't know, 2.4. Who knows what they'll come up with? It'll be exciting to see.
Yeah, I'll be excited to see if they get back to some of the earlier roadmap. I know that since the Adobe acquisition, there's been a big push to integrate a lot of Adobe product into the Magento core platform. So it'll be interesting to see what else they bring in from Adobe and what else they they focus on that's more core e-commerce centric. And not just synergy with the Adobe brands. There's been a mix of both happening. And so, which track will get more traction? I'll be interested to see what makes it into the final version there. In the meantime, I know that Magento, they've had various other side products that have had some shifts. Tomando had been bought by NeoPost, and Tomando's what's been powering Magento shipping. And so at this point, that's an end-of-life product. NeoPost was losing money on Tomando and decided to shutter up that business, even after whatever investment they made into acquisition. I guess they couldn't do it. It didn't produce the way that they were hoping. So I know people are shifting over to other platforms like Shipper HQ. I don't know if you've run into anyone that was using Magento shipping. I never saw a big volume of users on that, but
we do. We have a lot of we're a partner or referral partner with Shipper HQ. We don't get paid anything from it, but they're a good product, and so we send people their way just because it seems to be a very stable company, and I think we'll see it continuing to be even more stable just because losing that Tomando is a sad thing. It takes away most of the options. There's only a few options there anyway, but I think it'll continue to go towards that Shipper HQ push.
Yeah, and I think Shipper HQ, it's a good team. They came out of that web shop apps business, and even the CTO over there had created Blue Jalapeno, and they've got years and years of experience in the community. And they've built a strong product around that, just iteratively, building some really strong feature sets for those that need some complexity in their shipping in order to make the sales that they need to make. And that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but it's a nice platform, and it's really what I would consider community-centric as a company. They have their ear to the ground. They're very involved in the Magento community. So I think that they've helped a lot of Magento merchants to rise to the occasion and meet their needs as reasonably as possible. So that's an interesting one. At the same time, seeing shifts in some of the payment gateways available to Magento users. I know in Europe, they had a new standard come out, PSD2, which requires things like some form of two-factor authentication in the checkout to help avoid fraudulent orders, and that's led Magento to deprecate some payment gateways like CyberSource and eWay, and I think that's interesting because at some point they're gonna. I expect them to move forward with Magento payments. My understanding is that that's one of those things that was in the Magento roadmap that got sidelined for some of the Adobe additions, and so they haven't quite finished up with it, but that's a mix of Braintree and Signified coming together as something being offered directly by Magento, sort of like Shopify has Shopify payments. I imagine when this does release, it'll be much to the chagrin of some long-term players in the Magento community around payments and fraud, but still really interesting to see some of the shift happening in Magento's core and how they're dealing with the payment space. They're basically saying if you want to use, let's say, CyberSource moving forward, you've got to go to the Magento marketplace and install an extension that it's not going to be part of the core anymore.
I think that comes down to CyberSource bought out Authorize.net, and CyberSource then got acquired by Visa, and they decided, hey, we have two different gateway code bases. Let's start maintaining one, which is a wider used product, Authorize.net. So let's put more manpower and resources behind Authorize.net, and we'll slowly taper off and shut down the CyberSource gateway. It's just my opinion.
No,
I don't know that for a fact, but
that makes sense. And, I'll have to ask some of my friends over at Authorize.net and Visa and what have you, CyberSource, and see if there's any inside track to be had to why that's happening. But that would make sense. Maintain one gateway in Magento's core. I understand Magento's been adding more core bundled extensions, in essence, adding in more third-party systems with different releases of Magento 2. And so cutting back on maintenance of some, basically saying, look, if you want to keep using that, go, deal with deal with them directly. We're not going to deal with it in the core, just get the extension that you need from the developers. It makes sense. But in that, I'm not sure what the story is with eWay, but the hypothesis around CyberSource consolidating with Authorize.net, it certainly makes sense, at least.
Yeah, for sure.
If I do find out something, I'll add it to the show notes. That's an interesting one. So, we know some of the future. At the same time, there are some of these additional feature sets like the PWA Studio, the Progressive Web App Studio, that we're now at version 4 of that, and it's still moving along. I know that there's still a lot of work to be done if you want to launch, PWA front end with PWA Studio. Has your team worked on any of those? I know that that's still early days for a lot.
Yeah, we've done a few. We just don't see a big need for the PWA. If you're in kind of more of a repeat customers and a lot of repeat clients, reoccurring billing, things like that, I think PWA is a no-brainer, which is some of the clients that we've worked with. Whereas if you're more of a single purchase store, I just don't see a regular person downloading your website as an app. It doesn't make any sense for me to go buy one product and then never come back, but I download it as an app. So obviously, as a PWA, Progressive Web App, you want it to be something that you're selling constantly to clients, whether it's food or something else, and it's a recurring service. It makes it a little easier to operate and buy in an app, and it's faster because it's cached on your phone. So it makes sense to do PWAs. We just haven't had a lot of call for it. We've worked with a lot of manufacturers, and they don't. They're more B2B functionality, so we haven't seen a lot of need for it.
Yeah, I know that there's going to be more and more use case for these PWAs. I've been seeing some interesting ones. Probably, good future topics here on the podcast. But I guess it may even add some complexity to the sales process for Magento 2. Do you go traditional front end? Do you go with PWA? And you're adding that on top of, if you're still coming from Magento 1, and going back to an earlier topic, you had years of customization, years of data, years of things going on. It's kind of like when you first moved into your house and you only had, some stuff. But by the time you're ready to move out, there's a lot more stuff to move, that the job got bigger. So if anything, I suppose that that maybe, for those that are maybe more retail focused, or that are seeing the value in using this PWA technology and building a progressive web app, that is probably adding to the complexity of the build. That there's more to decide, and really, with PWA Studio, although they're getting there, there's more work to be done to build out the front of your site. That there are base Magento integrations and features that aren't necessarily there in PWA Studio that you've got to connect. So it's definitely interesting times in the community.
Yeah, we'd love to see more come from Magento on that PWA, and see how it goes in the future. I still think that there's certain use cases that it's fantastic for, And so I don't think a mass majority of Magento merchants have put an effort into the PWA because there's not a huge need for it. But maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe that's my opinion. I see a lot of our clients are manufacturers that are selling to bigger businesses, and they sell smaller transactions or bigger size transactions, but just not as much volume.
Yeah. I happen to like it just for the loading speed improvements. So, for websites that they can take advantage of that, it's pretty light and fast when you do it right. But in general, you're adding cost and complexity. And so I look at it a lot like when Magento 2 came out. And, was it time yet? Did you want to be an early adopter? Well, in some cases, yes, you're in a dogfight for customers. And if you can build, a better user interface, something faster, something, more ingenious, then yeah, you're going to invest into that however you can. But for your average business, that's not necessarily something that they want to be involved in. That there's a technology cost there, where they're not going to. They'll go with Magento and stay more cutting edge, but they won't necessarily go with that kind of feature set that's just going to be a little bit more to bite off than they're ready to chew at the moment. So, but interesting to hear. So, B2B, not really running into a lot of it. I do see more and more Magento sites launching that are B2B today than ever. And I wonder if some of that's just because of the market, because there are so many wholesalers and manufacturers and distributors that still haven't gone into the e-commerce world, and they're still playing catch up. Maybe this is their first or second site, whereas for retail, they've been at this longer. They haven't had a choice, or whether it's just because Magento, as a more complex platform, is lending itself to more of these use cases where they need the complexity of an open source system.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would imagine that the truth probably lies somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think time will tell as we continue to grow that we'll see more and more progressive web apps. I just know that with the few that we've worked with, didn't see a lot of users using it, so we haven't gone ahead and tried to sell a lot of it because it just doesn't. I feel like there's still not a mass market push for a need for an app when you can use a mobile website. I do see efficiency like Amazon and things like that, but I just don't see a lot of single providers like Nike that need an app that are selling a ton of shoes and have you purchasing shoes every month. I'm not going to download a Nike app. I'm not. So I don't see that
well,
necessary reason.
And some of the benefit of some of the PWA technologies, the ability to have, in essence, an app that loads without downloading an app specifically, with sort of just having that experience through your browser, having it be more appish. If that, I'm going to make up that word and not be happy that I did either. It doesn't sound great, but have more of the app experience without necessarily having to go to the whatever, Google Play Store or go through Apple and download a specific app in order to interact. Just having that right through your browser.
I mean, there are definitely benefits to the PWA, right? You have push notifications that you're able to send out coupons or daily sales or whatever to your clients, and so that's fantastic. But you can also do that on your website now. Yeah. So if somebody comes, you can. Every time I go to a website now, it seems like it's either allow or block. I'm always pushing.
Yeah, allowing browser notifications, things of that nature. There's definitely more of that. Little different than maybe some of the push notifications of a traditional app, but there's a lot that you can do. What I've been running into, and these are so unique. They're, and I suppose a lot of it is retail. They're folks that want you to be scanning something in their store, or there's so many features that you can build into a progressive web app now. And again, by making it faster and easier to just access these features and have this experience with this lighter, faster loading site, especially around the globe where, you're not always in strong Wi-Fi or 4G or soon to be 5G. It's interesting. We should probably touch on this one again in the future, maybe come back to it, see how it's changed, see see if the jury has come back any different with you on the PWA tech in the future. But I know that these are the kinds of things that for Magento that are really the cutting edge, that are allowing merchants to differentiate between the user experience that you're going to get on Amazon or some other random place. That's in some cases, especially in retail, it's important to have that user experience, to have that customer journey that's curated and enjoyable and easy and different. And that's what I think a lot of winning brands are doing. It was great to recently see Nike decide that they tested out selling on Amazon and they're leaving it. And going back to brands like that, obviously they're as large as you get, and they care a lot about their brand as a brand, more than just their product sales. But I think that that's a lot of the future for brands in general. It's how do they build an e-commerce experience, not just how do they build a store. And so, while B2B might be more centered around the functionality and the ERP connections and the quote systems and the buyer experience of having different buyers within a company and approval processes and being able to order in bulk by SKU and doing all these different things that are more of that, being able to have store credits and by using different net terms, having limited availability, that retail is going to be dominated by the customer experience. Already is, I hope. Those are the winners out there. So, it's been really fun chatting about, some of this Magento 2 end of life, that has been happening, and that will continue to impact merchants, obviously, from the web hosting side of things. And I imagine, Brandon, from the web development side of things, our number one concern is that folks stay up to date, stay secure, that they don't face security issues, features they can, roadmap and choose to move forward with as they see fit. But we always want to see merchants staying up to date. And that includes on the hosting layer, being on a version of Magento that'll keep up with the latest versions of PHP and other server software so that they don't have security holes. Do you have any final thoughts to add on today's topics?
I would love to. I appreciate you letting me come on this podcast with you and take some time to talk. I do think that there's the future going forward with Magento looks bright and exciting to be able to do some simpler patches and updates that haven't been really available or is easy to do in Magento 2 and 2.1 and 2.2. And so 2.3 going forward, we're excited about the potential there and the ability to do some simpler updates. I know we have several clients that have very large, heavily customized sites. And so doing those updates is very demanding on them, and they don't like doing them. And it's hard to get them to make that shift. In fact, we have one client right now that they want to wait till next year to do an update. And we've been pushing for probably 6 months now to do some updates. And they just, because of the cost, they are choosing not to. And it's very resource intensive over the past few years with Magento 2. And I think I'm hoping that it will be less resource intensive for future maintenance and updates. And I look forward to seeing how that changes in the future, if there's any differences with Magento 2.4. But as you know, security and security breaches are always a hard thing to constantly be keeping up ahead of. And I don't think the businesses put that at the forefront. They prefer sales over security. And I think it's hard for us to find the clients that are focused on both because of the resource costs that it takes to keep them up to date. So we're excited to see the future with Magento 2.3 and what it'll bring forward with us.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining today. This was fun as ever. Always great to chat with you. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in for another episode. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Stay up to date as new episodes are coming out. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to give us one of those 5-star reviews of the podcast. We appreciate it. It helps. And happy selling.
Thanks.